Play.
Play ya.
Play.
Mulai. Oke. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Salam sejahtera. Oke, Ner buka. Oke. Oke, Ner.
Sorry, Merkina.
Oke.
UHEC.
I'm sorry. Good morning, everyone. My name is Fido Kainde, and I'm your host. It's my pleasure to welcome you. And I want to introduce our speakers today. James Cullen, Associate Dean, Faculty of Business, Humber University, and Scott Hinson, Academic Enrichment Specialist, New York Institute of Technology of College of Osteopathic Medicine. Our moderator today, Mrs. Alfrina Mewenkam. This event was organized by Universitas Negeri Manado, Unima, Entrepreneurship Development Program, Faculty of Social Science, Unima, Research Institutions and Community Service, Unima, and also UHEC, Unima Humber Entrepreneurship Center. Okay, now I would like to invite our moderator, Mrs. Alfrina, please.
Thank you, Mr. Kido. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Salam sejahtera, shalom, om swastiastu, namo buddhaya, salam kebajikan. Good morning, Indonesia. Hello, good evening, Canada and USA. Hello, Scott. Hello, James. My name is Alfrina. Of course, like the rest of you, I'm working from home today. Our topic for today is COVID-19 higher education and entrepreneurship in Canada and USA. And Mr. Kido already introduced you. But I think I want to welcome you again. We are pleased to welcome Mr. James Cullen and Mr. Scott Hinson. Hello, Mr. James, Mr. Scott, how are you?
Doing very well, thank you.
I too am doing very well, thank you.
Okay, ladies and gentlemen, to start today's discussion, I have the list of topics that we hope to know from both of you. The first one is how the COVID pandemic has been affecting higher education in your country. The second one is how the COVID pandemic has been affecting entrepreneurship there. And the last one is what challenges are entrepreneurs face during this pandemic? And what can you suggest to young entrepreneur? Maybe you can tell us what entrepreneurs should be doing right now. That's all the question that we need to hear from both of you. I think we want to hear from Mr. James first. The floor is yours, Mr. James.
Very good. I'm just going to share my screen for a few minutes, just so you're seeing my speaking notes as well. I'll just make sure that I'm doing that properly. Can everyone see my screen now?
Yes.
Okay, good.
Okay, James.
Everyone can see it, yes?
Yes.
Yes, yes.
Okay, wonderful, wonderful. It was mentioned that, just as we're getting into this, it was mentioned that this webinar is being sponsored in part by UHEC. And that brings back good memories for me. I'm sure that the graphic has been updated since I last got this, but UHEC was originally conceived of a joint partnership between University of Manado and Humber College. And so it's always good to be talking with my friends from Manado, and it's exciting that there are people from many different places here today. As Freena mentioned, I prepared, as I'm sure Scott is prepared to talk a bit about implications for higher education and entrepreneurship, and I'm going to offer Canadian context on that. Although I don't say it in the slide here, I should say that different parts of Canada had different levels of lockdown. And in the city where Humber College is located, the Greater Toronto area, we've been locked down at essentially the same level as New York City. Not quite as locked down as Wuhan, China was, but or Northern Italy was. But we are very substantially locked down. I'm working from home and have been working at home for the last 12-ish weeks. Yeah, 12 weeks now. And my senior administration tells me that I should expect to be working from home at least until the beginning of January 2021. So for another 6.5 months, we'll be working from home. The high-level sort of implications for higher education in the Canadian context in general, and in the Toronto area in particular, at Humber, where I am an associate dean, is we expect we have two types of enrollment, obviously domestic enrollment and international enrollment. We expect our domestic enrollment to drop by between 20 and 30% because there is a significant number of students who want to have an in-class on-campus experience, and if they can't have that, they'll defer coming to college. So we're expecting a 20 to 30% reduction in enrollments, and all evidence suggests that is what's going to happen with domestic students. The interesting thing in the Canadian context is that the Canadian government is going to allow international students to stay in their home countries for the fall 2020 semester. The normal rules for international student visas to Canada is that you have to be in Canada and you can't take more than 25% of your classes online. But given the extraordinary situation with COVID-19, the Canadian government both allowed all students who were here in March to return to their home countries and just take their studies online. They're allowing all of those students any students who happen to be studying over the May, June, July, August time period to likewise stay at home. And they've given permission for the September through to December timeframe for students to stay in their home countries. We have no idea if the Canadian government will extend it beyond January. And that would have all sorts of implications if they did not, but we were still locked down. With respect to our international enrollments, we hope they won't drop too much, but at this point, we just don't know. More broadly then, because tuition, the implications for higher ed in Canada, because tuition revenues are dropping, or have dropped significantly and will stay dropped significantly, and that many other expenses will increase, but some expenses will drop. We can't say with certain what the budgetary impacts on a place like Humber College will be, but they won't be good. There are going to be significant problems we're going to have to face. And the biggest challenge of COVID-19 from an administrative point of view is the unknown. We simply don't know what the implications are in terms of the extent of the financial impact. So I made reference to the fact that, some expenses will increase and others will drop. Because we're doing significant live streaming of classes in the Humber College context, we use a platform called Blackboard Collaborate, which we pay a subscription fee to. Although I don't know the dollar value of the cost of increased streaming, I know it's significant, and I assume it's hundreds and hundreds of thousands of dollars, hundreds and hundreds of thousand Canadian dollars in additional expenses. The administrative team at Humber College uses Office 365 and a platform called Microsoft Teams, which is very similar to Zoom. And I know that the subscription costs for that have gone up significantly. Two expenses that are going to go down significantly, electricity, because we've shut down our campuses. They're very electrical intensive places. The electrical expenses for a place like Humber College run to $3 or $4 million per year, and I assume that there will be savings well in advance, well in excess of $1 million in reduced electrical costs, because they shut down most of the buildings, turn off all the lights, turn off the computers, all that sort of stuff. That has a significant decrease in costs. And then the Canadian context, which I assume is also the context that our colleague Scott would face in New York City, is that in the winter semester, when it gets very cold here and we have to pay to heat our buildings, if most of the campus is shut down through the winter semester, there will be, again, well in excess of $1 million in reduced, we use natural gas to heat all of our buildings, and that'll be a significant decrease. It's hard to say if the increases in expenses and the decreases in expenses will offset each other, but we're planning as if it will cost simply more to operate in this context. So that's the implications of higher education from my perspective. I think it would be fair to sort of stop and let Scott offer his perspective, because the American perspective is somewhat different than the Canadian perspective. Maybe if I'll stop sharing my screen and allow Scott to talk about higher education, and we could pivot into entrepreneurship next, if that's okay with you, Farina.
Yeah.
Okay, very good.
Okay, thank you, James. Now it's time for Scott. Time is yours, Scott.
Thank you. So I also talk about COVID-19's effect in the USA on higher education. And so we know kind of what we're talking about. This is the world we're kind of living in at the moment, whether it's Canada, Indonesia, or the US. So I want to talk about a little bit about what life for me was like pre-COVID, real quick. This is me when I visited Dr. Sindo in Indonesia a couple of years ago. Originally, we met in 2008 in Japan. I was teaching English, and he was a mere PhD student in economics at the time. Now, I traveled to Japan. He went, and I went back to the U.S. He went back to Indonesia. We're talking with the university in Canada and via Zoom right now. So the world was globalized before, right? It was very connected, but now it's even more connected. And then fast forward 11 years later, now I'm at the New York Institute of Technology, and this university is very innovative. Technology is in our name. And so what that means is for the university, there were options for online teaching, for going to class just online if it was a particular degree offered that. There was a hybrid, which means you can do both online and in person, and many, many different options for how to receive the education depending on the degree. Now, for my particular school of medicine, the students have lecture for about 3-4 hours a day. They can do that by going to the lecture hall. They could have done that by watching it pre-recorded or live. Now, some of the things had to be done in person, like anatomy or some of the osteopathic things that require you to touch the body. Now things have changed a little bit. And then also, I'm currently a PhD student in international development at the University of Southern Mississippi. So I have to drive there 3 times a semester, and the rest of the time it's live online. I take it online, I take it in person, I travel for it. So my life before COVID-19 was very influenced with technology. Not everybody's was. So it was globalization meets technological innovation, and then 2020 happened. And even those that were more in tune with using the technology, everything was disrupted. And so a lot of people are saying, hey, this is the greatest crisis of our generation. So this is the current COVID situation in America right now. And if you're a college student in the USA, it probably is the greatest crisis of your generation. The whole world has stopped. So medically, from medical perspective, in the US, over 2 million cases right now. Over 115,000 deaths from COVID-19 in the US. Unemployment in March was 4.4%. In April, it was 14.7%. Everything was told to shut down, to stay at home. So there was this psychological effect that's happening, the stay at home orders that Mr. Kola and Mr. Dr. Sindo, everybody was speaking of. Stay at home, social distancing or physical distancing, 6 feet or 2 meters away from each other. The stay at home orders right now are kind of being relaxed in most states, even though out of the 50 states, 22 states are still seeing increases in the number of COVID cases. But overall, we're going back. We're going back to work maybe at half capacity or limited capacity. And then in education, the university students all were sent home. 20 million university students sent home to do the rest of their semester online, to say, here you're on spring break, but don't come back to the college. My kids, I have 3 little kids. No more elementary school. My 6-year-old, no more kindergarten, for example. And so she went home, and we did the rest online. So what does this mean for education, higher education in particular? I would say this quote: where there is a disruption, there is invention. So there are things that can come out of this that we can all learn from, and invention will happen from this. And those that were doing it just the traditional way have seen a whole lot of new possibilities. So hard to predict the future, but I think we're under the assumption that everything has changed. There is no going back to normal. There is a new normal, as I'm sure you have heard. So this is some post-COVID possibilities. So possibility one is what I call an a la carte learning system. So that means maybe you want to do it online, maybe you want to go to class in person, maybe a hybrid version of the two, where you go to class sometimes, but you also have the online learning option. For example, my daughter, who's 6 years old, we received a survey from her school. Said, do you want to go to school online or do you want to go to school in person? You can choose. If you feel worried, if you feel concerned, you can go online. If you want to go to school in person, you can go into school in person. Students will be spread apart. You will wear masks, but you can go in person. So there's a choice there. And I don't think we've had this many choices before that we're going to have in the future. The other possibility, number two, is public-private learning, which already exists to some extent. Harvard does Harvard X. There are public institutions that may want to, universities that may want to partner with private institutions. So think about Facebook, Stanford, Google, Harvard, where these big tech companies who are not hurt by this are actually experiencing a lot of benefit from this, can be in this zone in the marketplace. In the United States, every university is doing this differently. No one's doing it the same. They all get their choice of how they're going to respond to this. They're just supposed to follow the guidelines of the Centers for Disease Control. But every university is doing this a little bit differently. So another option that universities are choosing are augmented learning, where we supplement the in-person learning with technology, whether it be virtual reality or some online or application components. And the other possibility is global learning. We know these colleges by name, and they give value to the student when they get a credential. So in the future, perhaps there are more global entities that teach to a certain trade or to a certain content area, and they are just as valued. And so it's not like I go to American University, but I go to this university that's full of American, Indonesian, Canadians, everyone at once. And it's not particularly grounded in one particular country. And then the last thing is light bulb learning, which means I don't know what to expect about the future because it's really hard to predict. It's probably something that we haven't seen before. So that's what I'm expecting to come out of this. Maybe not for every university, but for some universities somewhere, they're going to have a light bulb moment. Or maybe as an entrepreneurial student, you have a light bulb moment. So think about the invention of the light bulb. How much did it change the world? Everything was changed. The night is now no obstacle for working. For example, we are using light right now to have this webinar. I'm sure when Thomas Edison turned on his light bulb, people thought, whoa, this is crazy, or this is magic. I don't like this when it first came on. But then as their eyes adjusted and they realized they could see new things, they could explore new places, this could be education's light bulb moment. So we've been forced into this worldwide tragedy and it still continues, but now new possibilities are made clear. So from my perspective for entrepreneurial students, I would say that you should create your light bulb moment. Maybe even as we're talking about education entrepreneurship, perhaps you haven't even thought of education as something that can have components of entrepreneurial aspects that you can join in, the global economy of education and what could be possible. How can we bring content to students and train students in a way that gives them value? So this may be your light bulb moment. So that is what I hope for you. So after this, we can take some more more questions or more topics.
Okay. What a great explanation for us. Thanks, Mr. James and Mr. Scott. Now it's time for discussion. I open the session for three participants first. Hello. Okay, Mr. Aljon Dapa, can you please turn on your mic?
Mohon
Yes.
dibantu untuk ditranslate ya.
Sir, in English.
It's okay. Nggak apa-apa, bener. Silakan.
Okay, thank you very much. I see what did you explain, Mr. James and Mr. Scott. My question is how the psychology impact in the student about COVID-19 and how they can access to learn to finish their study, because we learn in online but no no see in the lecture. Jadi mungkin bagaimana faktor psikologi dari mahasiswa saat ini untuk bisa menyelesaikan studinya, sekaligus juga tetap memikirkan bagaimana dia juga untuk bisa tetap terus menerapkan sikap entrepreneurnya. Mungkin itu yang jadi pertanyaan. Terima kasih.
Okay, Mr. Aljon, next question.
Boleh, Ci Alfrina.
Yeah.
Reki.
Yes, Mr. Reki, please.
Okay, thank you very much. Hi, Scott. Hi, James. Thank you very much for joining us and to be our speakers today. Because now I'm working on the entrepreneurship for students, how to create student entrepreneurship in Unima. I also would like to know how you, especially your university, if available, they try to support the student entrepreneurship. I know in Canada, especially in the Humber, you have entrepreneurship center and support students. But I would like you to share here, maybe in the short, how you support them, how to create the creative idea to support a student for entrepreneurship. So they, after finishing their studies, they could be entrepreneurs. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Reki. Who's next? Is there anyone? Okay, Mrs. Olfi, please turn on your mic. Please turn on your mic, Mrs. Olfi. Mr. Kido, can you help Mrs. Olfi Monigir? Mrs. Olfi Monigir.
Hi, Dee.
Hi. Please.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, we can hear you.
Oh, can you hear me?
Yes.
Oh, okay. Yes. Thank you so much for the opportunity. Hi, Scott and James. Well, how glad to have you here, especially in this line. Really glad to hear your presentation. And this is what I need to ask, according to your perspective. How actually can you give a really great suggestion for the students that after they finish their study, and then they can make an entrepreneur by themselves, even just a very small thing. Well, that's my question. Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you, Anchi. Now it's time for James and Scott to answer the questions.
I'm just, I think I've captured the 3 questions. I'm just going to share my screen here in a second. If you just give me 1 second. It's like I'm writing on a whiteboard here after graduation. Forgive me there. That was a bit awkward. I'll just share my screen again. So can everyone see those? Are my 3 questions showing up there? Yes?
Yes.
Well, great. Scott, perhaps both of us could just alternate through these questions. And I want to say that Scott's construct of the light bulb moment, I think is extraordinarily powerful. His point that prior to the invention of the light bulb, we had no control as a practical matter at night. And maybe if I could just take Scott's construct and just word it slightly differently, what was Thomas Edison's greatest contribution? It wasn't exactly the invention of the light bulb. It's that he gave everyone 2 to 3 hours more working time every night, which it was one of the most profound improvements in human productivity in history, certainly on the same scale as the internet. But I don't know, Scott, if you wanted to sort of jump in on the first question, which is, what are as I captured, what is the psychological impact on students when working online? I'm particularly interested in the fact that you're doing a PhD online and you teach, I believe, online. So I'm very interested in hearing your thoughts on that.
Sure. Thank you, James. Yes, for me personally, again, we already had the capacity to teach online, for me to go to school online and in person, but the in-person piece was dropped, and it had to be for the sake of social distancing. But I think a lot of us, especially those of us who appreciate efficiency, have found doing things online via video conferencing like this as very, very useful and efficient. I see a lot more students one-on-one than I did before, and I'm not in person with them, and that's fine. We still see each other, still look into each other's eyes, and we can still work through whatever problems or whatever we're teaching. And then as far as classroom sizes, we have small groups. For example, in my College of Osteopathic Medicine, we have case-based learning, and it's already built around a case. It's small group, but say it's a group of 20 people and you can't all speak. Well, something like Zoom has breakout rooms where you can drop it down to 5 people per room and you can have conversations and you can mix it up. And for some people that might be a little bit shy in a group, this is a little bit more controlled for them because they can speak and people can't really speak over them like they can in an in-person group. So I think it works quite well. Obviously, humans are made for connection and content, I believe. But for the most part, we're making do. A lot of schools are looking at not even considering anything like previous normal was defined as until 2021 or later. So this is the way this year is going to go for sure. So it was psychologically impacting for some students. I will say I brought up the example of my daughter who's very young. She was very excited and she's still very excited. She's like, I don't want to go back to school. I like online learning. So for someone like her who's 6 years old, she grew up. She's what we call kind of a digital native. This is her world. She doesn't know anything different. For my students who are 22, 24, this is so natural to them. But that doesn't mean it hasn't had a psychological impact because it wasn't their choice. They want the experience of a university campus. That's what they paid for. That's what they expected. So I will say, from a psychological perspective, our counseling centers at the university are seeing more students than they've probably ever seen before. So there's a need to address this from a counseling perspective, because it is hard. It is hard on the mind to work remotely. But I would say it's kind of a blessing that it is the 21st century and we're talking about college students who are in the 20s, because they know how to do this better than us that had to learn it when we started this or started working. So I think there's been good and bad as far as the psychological impact is concerned.
So I'll jump in and layer on top of Scott's excellent point. Scott, I really like the way you're contrasting both what you observe as a teacher with your college-age students and the experience your younger children are experiencing. That's a very interesting perspective. So my perspective as an associate dean is I'm not in the classroom as such, and so I'm supervising 12 different programs that are somewhat varied in nature. We have some law. I have 4 law-related programs and a program in event management, 3 or 4 programs in the business of beauty. And Scott will find this interesting. I'm also responsible for an undergraduate degree and a graduate certificate program in international development at Humber. I think that's all of them. What my teachers and program department heads report through to me is that attendance generally is well up. Many teachers who reported a typical attendance rate of 60 to 70% were telling me that for most of their live lectures or interactive sessions that they were experiencing attendance between 90 and 95%. In part because, as Scott pointed out, for digital natives, under 25 who've never known a world where you couldn't communicate through variations on the tools we're using today, it just comes naturally to them. They no longer had to commute to campus. But I think the most important issue is because Toronto was experiencing a New York City level lockdown, students had nowhere else to go. They were in their house while people in the Toronto area were permitted to go out and walk and go to select stores that were still open. All of the normal things that students would be distracted by, clubs and bars and restaurants and all of that sort of stuff were all closed. So students really didn't have any other choices. Many of the students who, because we're a polytechnic technical college, as opposed to a residential university, most of our students work part-time. And unfortunately, most of those students would have lost their jobs because the type of jobs that students would have in restaurants, bars, coffee shops, so on and so forth, all of those places were shut down for an extended period of time. So we had attendance up. And so I think students were engaged that way. I would say the majority of students
Sorry, we lost your sound, James.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Is my sound returned? As an administrator, I wasn't able to fully gauge the psychological impact on all students, because I think the students who reacted the most poorly to it would have simply stopped studying and stopped communicating with us. But I would say that most students were resilient, and most teachers were resilient and were able to make all of this work. But as Scott also pointed out, that his college is much more advanced than mine in terms of remote delivery, hybrid delivery, and online delivery. We struggled to switch over from classroom-based activity to remote-based activity, but we had no choice because we were all in a sort of a lockdown mode. What will be interesting is that as we go into the autumn or fall semester, is how teachers and students cope when they know that from start to end they're going to be completely online. And I guess that's just an unknown, and hopefully we'll have an opportunity to do another webinar in 6 months and I can give you an update on what the fall semester looked like. Since my screen is still being shared, why don't I jump into how are we supporting student entrepreneurship at Humber, and then allow Scott to comment on that. In a sense, as questions 2 and 3 are interrelated. So how are we supporting student entrepreneurship at Humber or New York Institute of Technology or wherever, and suggestions for students to thrive as entrepreneurs after graduation. So the short answer is that we haven't focused on entrepreneurship as much as I think we should have in the last 3 months that we've been in remote learning mode. Except for in the case of most of the programs at a place like Humber College that have a co-op term or an internship or a field placement, whatever you want to call it, because so many of the employers, organizations that would typically host a student doing an intern or a field placement were closed. Students had to be entrepreneurial in the sort of most basic sense of the word, just to find internships. And in many cases, we encourage the students to come up with their own business concepts in lieu of, or instead of doing an actual field placement. We gave students, in order to help them with their sort of graduation pathways, to come up with business plans for potential businesses that they may want to start after they graduate. We didn't require students to do that, and I wouldn't say that we actively we went out of our way to encourage it, but it was one of a slate of options that we gave to students. So in that way, we're trying to make the best of the COVID situation, allow students to grow through COVID as opposed to just go through it. But we haven't put supporting entrepreneurship front and center as of yet. I know that when we resume in the fall, our Humber Center for Entrepreneurship will have a full slate of programs that they're currently developing that are oriented towards supporting entrepreneurship in a sort of very online focused world. But we have a lot to do in that regard. Scott, I'll just take one stab at suggestions for students to thrive as entrepreneurs after graduation. And I'd say this to our friends in Indonesia, anyone who would ask me about it in Canada, and even our friend who's currently connecting with us from Japan. When you look at the general media reports about the economy, there is a lot of concern about the massive amounts of unemployment that exists, and the fact that so many businesses have shut down, and that COVID-19 will make it very difficult for certain types of businesses to rebound. The travel industry has obviously been decimated. The in-person restaurant experience has been decimated. Professional sports, which is a huge, and collegiate sports, which is a huge economic driver in North America, all of that has been shut down. So there are a number of different instances of economic activity that are dependent on large crowds of people being together in the same place that are being very affected. And you know, if a student came to me and said, you know, I'm thinking of starting a restaurant, I'd say, well, you're going to want to think very hard about that in a Canadian context, given the physical distancing rules that exist. But in some ways, someone starting a restaurant from scratch, once they're allowed to start doing that in my part of Canada, perhaps they can build their business models from the ground up, with physical distancing in mind, and optimizing their business for delivery. But what I would say more broadly is that, uh, for entrepreneurs to realize that there will be tremendous opportunities to service people who have already changed their behavior because of COVID-19. I think that anything that leads to supporting people in their providing services or products in people's homes to make their personal lives more comfortable at home, or their office life, if they're working from home, more comfortable, there will be tremendous opportunities there. And then I think downstream, there'll probably be a lot of entrepreneurial opportunities for people who can make sense of what to do with commercial real estate, which I'd say in an entire, all of North America, but certainly in Toronto, the city I live in, there's going to be a huge problem with reconfiguring commercial real estate to reflect the new realities of COVID. I'm speaking obviously in great generalities here, but what I'd point out is it's not all bad, that there will be lots of opportunities to serve people where they are and where people are going to be for the next probably 18 months to 2 years, until we have a wide distribution of a vaccine, or widespread herd immunity, as the immunologists call it. Is that people will continue to live, they'll continue to work, most of them. They'll continue to spend money. They're just going to spend money in different ways. And if you can get out in front of where that sort of new expenditure of money is going to be, I think you're going to have lots of opportunities for success. But I've said a lot there, and I'd love to hear what Scott has to say.
I think James makes a great point about looking to where people are spending money. And I think about what I've spent money on in the last few months. All things that have to do with the outside, because we're still allowed to go to nature. I've bought kites and bikes and all sorts of things because I have little kids and they can't stay inside all day. And they go outside more than ever before. And if you go to a retail store right now and look for bikes, they're almost all sold out because everyone wants to buy a bicycle. It's big business right now, everywhere. So that's a great point, looking for those trends. Going back to your questions, I'll keep my my comments brief, but the way we're supporting our students and entrepreneurship students is that, as James said, restaurants closed, students lost their jobs, but they still had goals. So they still had the goal of finishing their semester. They still had the goal of being with their class, being with their, peers and their professors, and in whatever way they could. They still had that goal. Not everybody had that goal. They might have lost everything that they had goal-wise, but our students still have this degree they're trying to seek, and they have a lot less distractions in some way to seek it. There's not as many things they can go out and do, unfortunately, but they can still go after this goal. So 3 things I wanted to say about number 3, suggestions for students after graduation in general. Goals, stick with your goals, define your goals, that you can still have goals, and you just have to define new ways to achieve them or to think about them. The second is, don't think about your entrepreneurship ideas by yourself in your own head, but still have friends that you bounce ideas off of. You need community. So the second thing would be community. Even if it's this kind of community via Zoom or something, you need that to build that energy to create new ideas. So working with someone to create something, I think would be piece of my advice. And the last thing is tenacity or determination. Everyone is in this together. We're going through this together. But I love what James said. We're trying to grow through this and not just go through this. So grow through this. My students are trying to become medical doctors. And it's very concerning for them that they don't have all the advantages that they thought they would have, whether it be in their study plan or their rotation site or their residency. Everything's upended. Everything's changed. But it's the same across the board for everyone trying to do this endeavor, in their case, become a doctor. So the difference is how they react to this. Determination, tenacity. Who's going to go through this and grow through this better? And if you can be better than the people next to you, and you can do something new with this, then you have found your advantage. So I would say grow, community, goals, determination. It's the same for all of us as humans. We are trying to be better ourselves and to make the world a better place. And we may have new ground rules that we create from the ground up. So I would say for all you students, that's exactly what I would do. It's what I'm going to do. I hope that you can also see all of the good that can come, good and goals that can come from this.
Okay, what a brief explanation for us, James and Scott. Now, I can give last session discussion. I open just for student. Is there anyone to ask?
Answer.
The last session is just only for student.
Nothing. Thank you for thank you for this time all of you given. As we know, the coronavirus currently requires us to stay at home. My question: how to take concrete steps in overcoming problems related to the demands of entrepreneurship work? Thank you.
There was a little distortion there, and I'm wondering, Frina, if you could just repeat the question, please. I think
can you repeat the question, Gusti? Can you repeat the question, Gusti?
Okay, ma'am. As we know, the coronavirus currently requires us to stay at home. My question: how to take concrete steps in overcoming problems related to the demands of entrepreneurship work? Thank you.
I think he mean is what the concrete you can suggest to student while they remain at home.
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Right.
I will just say that you all, by being here, you have access to online and to the internet. So you have information, more information than you can process in a lifetime at your fingertips. So what I would say during this time is to learn as much as you can. Learn from other history where disruption has occurred. What was created? Learn, read biographies, read about companies who created something. You know, Uber wasn't around 10 years ago, and now it's worldwide. So learn from others. And again, I always recommend doing it with someone so that you can bounce ideas, and they can be, two heads are just greater than one. So collaborate.
I think that Scott said that with great precision, which is if you're going to be stuck at home, you should be studying as much as possible, including all of the basic tenets of entrepreneurship. And I would say that there are two tracks of that. What are the basic business development or business maintenance skills that you need around finance? At the end of the day, a business must have future revenues that are greater than future expenses in order for it to be viable. So, you know, building on what you've learned at Unima around finance and accounting and all of those sorts of things about the mechanics of your business. And then, as Scott points out, you have more information available to you at your fingertips than ever in human history. And to be looking at what are the trends emerging. And I would imagine that the trends will be somewhat different in Indonesia than they are here in Canada. So I'll just offer a Canadian perspective. One of the things that we discovered in the part of Canada I live in is that while delivery system, home delivery systems for certain types of things, especially through companies like Amazon, were very well developed for a certain class of products, but groceries were not well developed in terms of home delivery. And there were large numbers of people who did not want to go to grocery stores. And I found something very instructive in the way entrepreneurs here in Toronto, in the Greater Toronto area, approach that. There were grocery delivery services here in Toronto, but they were overwhelmed when because they just weren't built to scale for everyone being at home. Some grocery stores tried to develop full-fledged e-commerce systems, and that takes time, and it was complicated for them. There was a grocery store, a food retailer near my house that had never previously had any service for online delivery. And what they did is they kept it as simple as possible. They just put on their flyers that they sent out to individual houses that if you want to email and order to the grocery store, just email it. And at first I looked at it and I was like, well, how do I know what you have? But then I just basically remembered that, you know, they were a full-fledged grocery store. And I tried them out and I just emailed them and I said, here are the things I'd like. And they didn't get everything right. But if they made a mistake and you told them by email that they sent the wrong stuff, they gave you a credit and they just made the delivery work. And I don't think I'm explaining this very well, but the message here is simplicity works. So here was a company that had no choice but to offer some sort of online service. And they didn't buy any technology. They just said, we're going to continue to distribute our flyer to tell you what stuff we have on sale. And if you want us to deliver it, we'll charge you a very reasonable rate, $7 to deliver to your house. And you just email us what you want and we'll call you and read it out together and make sure we more or less get it right. And that was it. It was so simple, it was ridiculous. But I've spent hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of dollars with this store now, precisely because they kept it so simple and precisely because it was about a human connection. They didn't even attempt to make a website. They're just like, just email us. In an Indonesian context, I think it would have been just WhatsApp us. It's in a Canadian context, it was just so simplicity. Simplicity. If you can keep it simple, I think you'd be surprised at what you might be able to encounter.
I think I want to echo what Mr. Cullen said. On my desktop at my office, I have this Post-it note, and can you see it? I don't know, but it says, simplify to execute. Simplicity, that's beautiful. Simplify to execute. In whatever context it is, that's likely good for you and efficiency and good for your customer as well.
Connection not. Okay, thanks, James and Scott. We are on the. I still give one very last question. Is there any participant who want to ask something from James and Scott or Mr. Eki?
Give to the student maybe one more question if they have.
Can you hear me?
Permisi saya Enci.
Mr. Kido, can you help me?
Juswafino.
I cannot hear anyone.
Juswafino.
Joshua
I think
Fino.
Joshua has a question.
Yeah.
Thank you for the opportunity. I have some question. How the American government help the community? Example,
Mr.
like
Kido,
in Indonesia,
can anyone hear
government,
me?
The government
Yes,
provide.
yes, Enci, we can hear you. Sorry, Joshua.
Yeah.
Oh my God, nggak ada yang kita pe internet mati langsung tadi.
We can hear you, Enci.
Yeah. Joshua, you were asking something about how did the American government, I'm just trying to capture your question.
Yes. Thank you.
Joshua, repeat your question.
Okay. How the American government helps the community? Example, like in Indonesia, the government give food, provide the food for the community. How in America? Thank you.
And maybe in Canada, James.
Yeah.
And in Canada.
So I will say in the U.S., there was a stimulus plan that went to individuals. For most individuals, adults, it was $1,200 to help because many people lost their jobs or lost some sort of income, and then $500 for children. So there was an individual stimulus plan that went to individuals. There was also a paycheck protection program for small businesses. So the PPP, Paycheck Protection Plan, and that was for small businesses, and that was in order to keep their employees paid on their payroll until at least a few months, until hopefully the worst of it was over. And I'm not sure if the worst of it is over yet, but many businesses now are opening back up. In our state, we just opened up from phase 1 to phase 2. Phase 1, where businesses could have
Unima Talk